Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the sixth lecture in our series Competition Policy and Strategy, which is the English version of the German lecture Wettbewerbspolitik und Strategie, which I gave in 2020. This lecture is going to be about market definition. It's basically an essential step in evaluating mergers, and therefore it's important to deal with this topic. It will build strongly on the concepts that we had in the previous lecture, where we were talking about market power. So it's very important that you have watched the previous video before we talk about before you watch this. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. That would help us to make the channel grow and reach more people, which is, I think, very important. Okay, so let's begin. The first thing where we have to start is that we have learned certain measures of market power. And these measures are the Lerner index, concentration rates, and the Herfindahl-Hirschman index, and of course also market shares, right? All of that gives us an indication of how strong market power is in a market. And this measurement of market power is relevant in merger cases and in abuse of dominance cases. There it's particularly important. The problem is, what market are we actually investigating? And the answer to this question is market definition, right? So we have to define the relevant market before we look at market power and all of that stuff. And to illustrate the problem is we just have three supermarkets, A, B, and C. And two of those supermarkets, A and B, are very close to each other. There's 1 kilometer distance between the two. However, if you want to go from A or B to supermarket C, you have to have a 30-kilometer drive. And the question is, are supermarkets A, B, and C, or C, active in the same relevant market? Right? And the question isn't too easy at first glance, right? Because you can easily, if you look at A and B, it could be that they are very close substitutes because the distance between them is relatively short, and supermarket C is very far away, so it's probably not in the same market as A and B. However, it could be the case that supermarkets A and B offer completely or have a different assortment, for instance, right? So it could be that supermarket A specializes in organic products, whereas B is more of like it doesn't care about that. And if C also cares about organic products, then probably A and C are in the same market, whereas B is not. So it's it's not easy to say. And another example that is always quite illuminating is if you look at a city's restaurant environment. So could you argue that a pizza parlor is in the same market as a Chinese restaurant? Well, for some people it is, right? So if you're hungry and you don't care whether you have a pizza or a Chinese dish, then it's not important for you, right? But if you have problems digesting gluten or wheat products, then pizza isn't probably the best alternative for you, whereas a rice dish would be quite favorable, right? So for those, it's not that they are very close substitutes. And the other thing is, of course, if the pizza parlor is in the same city but 30 kilometers away from another pizza parlor, whereas the Chinese restaurant and the pizza parlor are close to each other, then again we are in the consideration that we have made here. So it's not clear from the get-go what the relevant market actually is. And in practice, we have to differentiate the relevant product market and the relevant geographic market. In German, we say sachlich for product market and geografisch for geographic market. And it's important to identify the most relevant market forces at play here, right? So, and there's demand substitutability plays a role, supply substitutability, and potential competition. How do we get these different concepts together, right? In order to do that, we can look at the EU's Commission notice on the definition of the relevant market for the purposes of community competition law. And there it's pretty well defined what we're actually talking about. The relevant product market is defined in paragraph 7, and it is said that a relevant product market comprises all those products and or services which are regarded as interchangeable or substitutable by the consumers by reason of the product's characteristics, their prices, and their intended use. Right? So in that case, you would say that you look at the consumer, you look at the product, and you say, can the consumer substitute the products or not? It's as easy as it sounds. The devil is in the detail, because exactly the substitutability is it's not easy to say, right? But here we get a clear idea of what the relevant product market is. And similarly, the relevant geographic market is defined in paragraph 8. The relevant geographic market comprises the area in which the undertakings concerned are involved in the supply and demand of products or services in which the conditions of competition are sufficiently homogeneous and in which can be distinguished from neighboring areas because the conditions of competition are appreciably different in those areas, right? So you would say, okay, if the competition conditions in one area are different from that of another area, you're talking about different areas, right? And there's also concepts where we can look at this. So you basically have to look at the trade flows here. That's important. Now, what about demand, supply, substitutability, and potential competition? The document that I've just referred to has some answers to that. First, in paragraph 13, it is said that the demand substitutability is considered as the most effective disciplinary force in terms of competition of the competitors in the market or the suppliers. And it's probably it's you know, easy to say that if the consumers have close substitutes available, then this can affect the firm's behavior very strongly, i.e. it can limit their ability to exert market power. So if the consumer can easily substitute away from a product, this can affect the conditions of sale. That's how it's called in the document. So it basically means if the consumer can easily substitute away from a product, you cannot increase the price so much. And why is demand substitutability so important? Well, we actually want to determine the choice set basically of the consumer. So what are the actual substitutes, and thereby can we say something about demand as elasticity? Okay, looking at supply substitutability, then it's the concept that suppliers can react to small permanent changes in prices by switching production to the relevant products without incurring significant additional costs or risks. So how can we interpret that? Well, we can use an easy example. If the pizza parlor increases prices, then is it possible for the nearby pizza parlor or by the Chinese restaurant to change production without incurring too high costs and produce pizza as well, right? And that can discipline the pizza parlor as well, right? Potential competition is a little bit more subtle because it basically means that you have this contestability concept at play, which we have been talking about in chapter E. And it basically means how easy it is for potential competitors that are not yet in the market to get into the market. And that stage is not considered as a part of market definition, but it is potentially investigated on subsequent stages. Right? So it's not part of the general blueprint on how to examine a merger, for instance. But it will be relevant on later stages, probably. So, okay, so now how can we define a relevant market? There are several ideas and concepts that are available, and we will look at some of them, not all. That would be go too far beyond the scope of this lecture. But I think the most central idea is this SSNIPs, it's SNP test, which basically says small but significant non-transitory increase in price. That's what SNP stands for. And it's basically a formal test of market definition based on a very simple and intuitive idea. And this idea is that we want to find the smallest group of goods for which a hypothetical monopolist is able to increase prices permanently and profitably by a small percentage. So that definition has quite a lot in it, so it makes sense to look at the concept of the test in more detail. So, first of all, we have to consider some goods. And these goods are supplied by the merging parties. Right? So suppose the pizza parlor merges with the Chinese restaurant. And then we assume that there is a monopolist for pizza and Chinese food. And this monopolist would increase the price of these products by 5 to 10%. And the question now is this increase in prices profitable or not? If the price increase is profitable, we have already found the relevant market. If the price increase is not profitable, we have to add close substitutes and increase prices by 5 to 10% again. Why do we increase by 5 to 10%? Well, that's the small part of this SNP. And why do we have to look at a certain range of products, and why do we take substitutes? Well, go back take my olive oil example that I usually have, and suppose we have two olive oil producers that merge, right? And if we can assume that it's for this particular, if this merged entity is considered a monopolist and it increases the price of olive oil by 5 to 10%, then this would be the relevant market. So if all olive oil producers were merged to a single entity, and the price would increase by 5 to 10%, then we would have found our relevant market already. If this price increase does not pay off, we take the next close example. Why do we do that? Well, if there was a monopolist for olive oil and it would not be profitable for this monopolist to increase prices, then we would basically say that this cannot be a relevant market, as a monopolist would always be, based on the starting point of competition, would always find it profitable to have a small price increase, right? And if this is not the case, then consumers can switch to other products too easily, and we basically have not yet found the relevant market, right? Or suppliers can interact easily and stuff like that. All of that basically means that there is no market power, and we cannot have found the relevant market here. So, and then we add the next close substitute, which would be, for instance, sunflower oil. So if we have a monopolist now for olive oil and sunflower oil, right? Could this monopolist in this market increase the prices by 5 to 10%? If it is profitable, then we have found our relevant market. Then we would say, okay, olive oil and sunflower oil are in the same relevant market, but for instance, butter is not in the same relevant market. If the price increase does not pay off for the monopolist of olive oil and sunflower oil, then we have to take the closest substitute, which could, for instance, be butter or other oils that could be relevant, right? And you increase this process, try to increase the price. Does it pay off? Yes. You found the market. Does it pay off? No. You take the next closest substitute and repeat the process, right? And we have just looked at this from a product market view. We can also take the look at we can also look at it from a geographic market definition standpoint, and there you just add the next close firms to the merging entity. Right? So pizza parlor in the city, the pizza parlor in the next city, and so on and so forth, until a price increase pays off, and then you have found the relevant geographic market. Formally, what you compute is a critical sales loss, delta crit, delta Q crit, and that basically poses the upper bound on sales such that a monopolist could increase by the prices by 5 to 10% and would still break even, right? Such that this price increase is still profitable. And then you look at the actual loss, and if the actual loss in sales is greater than the critical loss in sales, this means that you lose more consumers than you would have to lose in order to at least break even. That means that it's not profitable. And that you have in the next bullet point here, in the parentheses here. But the other case would be that if your actual loss is smaller than the critical loss, this means that you lose less customers that you would lose in order to break even. And that means that the price increase is profitable and the relevant market is found, right? So if the actual loss is smaller than the critical loss, you found the relevant market because the price increase pays off. If the actual loss is greater than the critical loss, you have not yet found the relevant market as you lose too many customers in order for the price increase to pay off, right? Equivalently, you could also talk about elasticities. Then you have a critical own price elasticity, and if this critical own price elasticity is higher than the actual elasticity, that means that based on the starting price level, an increase in prices is too elastic for the price increase to pay off. That means that you have to take closer substitutes, and if the actual elasticity if the critical price elasticity is lower than the actual price elasticity, if the actual price elasticity is okay, you have it here. If the critical own price elasticity is higher than the actual elasticity, a price increase is profitable, right? Because the consumers are less elastic than they would need in order for you to break even. That means you don't lose as many consumers and make profit. If the critical own price elasticity is lower than the actual elasticity, that means that you lose too many consumers, then you would have to lose in order to break even. That means that it's not profitable to increase prices, and you just include the next close substitutes, right? So that's basically the formal part of the SNP test. Look at actual sales loss or actual elasticities, and then compute the critical elasticities, the critical sales losses, and compare the two values and look whether a price increase leads to more consumers walking away from you as it would be necessary for you to break even. If you lose too many consumers, you have to take the next close substitute. If you don't lose as many consumers, then you have found the relevant market. This test is quite elegant in its design. However, it has some caveats, as basically anything in the world. The first thing is the so-called cellophane fallacy, which is based on an older case where this was present or was expected to be present. And that is the problem that if we have a monopoly situation in this as a starting point, then this concept fails. Why? If you start at a monopoly price, no price increase pays off, right? So the cellophane fallacy makes this test completely, renders it completely useless. The other thing is that we have a toothless fallacy, right? And there we have special considerations that make this test not really work, right? And that is, for instance, here it's about bananas, and it is said that there's certain groups that have no substitutes available, and that means that they are its own relevant market, right? And that's basically just special considerations that are necessary here. How relevant is that? Well, in fact, it is. You can compute a SNP test, and it's done in reality. However, it requires very detailed data on prices and quantities, and if you have it available, also other demand characteristics. Why is that? Well, I've told you in the last lecture that you can back out marginal costs and price elasticities from structural demand estimations, right? And these structural demand estimations, for those if you want to conduct them, you have to have prices and quantities, right? You can do that relatively easily if you have prices and quantities alone. However, you will have to have some certain control variables, and you have to have a good theory behind it in order to back out what is demand and what is supply. Because a shift in price and quantities, if you have that, it could be that the demand or the supply curve shifted in order to get these points, and therefore you cannot isolate the functions unless you have a clear theory in mind and the proper data to conduct the estimation, right? And that can be very sophisticated. In reality, I think currently one of the most sophisticated methods would be Barry, Levinson, and Pecos approach, where you have where you need to have not only characteristics of the products but also characteristics of the consumers to apply, for instance, a random coefficients logit estimation. So that is quite sophisticated. However, you can do that to back out elasticities relatively accurately, and that helps you to then conduct a snip test, right? And you can do that in reality, especially if you investigate a merger and you can request the data from the respective parties. Okay, that was the snip test. There's another test which is called the UPP, the upward pricing pressure test. And the idea behind it is that as a starting point, we can use this Farrell and Shapiro article here from the Bell Journal of Theoretical Economics of 2010. And it basically means that concentration-based, well, it says that if you use concentration-based market measures of market power and you have differentiated goods markets, that could be a little bit problematic, and it could basically be, and they call it, you run the risk of ruling products in or out basically arbitrarily, and then you turn to an artificial line drawing exercise, whether you include a product or not, right? So that could be an issue. And the question that we ask ourselves here with the UPP test is whether a merger generates net upward pricing pressure or not, right? And the idea behind is that if you have a merger of two firms, this leads to two effects. First, it lessens competition. Well, it's basically clear, you take out one firm of the market, so it necessarily leads to a lessening of competition. But you can also have a lowering in the prices if you have efficiency effects. Efficiency effects means that you have a decrease in marginal cost, for instance. We will talk about that in the next chapter when we talk about mergers in detail, but that's basically the idea here. And if the first effect dominates, so if the lessening in competition due to the loss of one firm is stronger, its effect is stronger on price than it is for the lowering of marginal costs, then we have net upward pricing pressure, right? And we will have a small look at the Farrell-Shapiro approach here that I'm going to present now. What is the idea? We have a merger between two firms, 1 and 2, and each of these firms produce a differentiated goods, and they compete à la Bertrand. So careful here, we have differentiated goods. So firm 1 produces one variant of the good, and firm 2 produces another variant, right? So if you look at olive oil, then firm 1 would be probably a little bit more north in a given country, so their olive oil probably tastes different and has different characteristics than that of the other firm, right? And if they merge, they each continue to produce their own products, right? And they are not the same, or not perceived as the same from the viewpoint of the consumers. The profits are called pi I, with I equals 1 or 2, and marginal costs are the same for both firms. Okay, and we call the pre-merger prices pi pre, and the pre-merger costs C pre. What is the post-merger situation? Well, the formerly independent firms 1 and 2 become one firm, 1 and 2, and each of these former individual entities now becomes a division of this merged entity, right? And the problem is that, and that's the problem that the merged entity faces, if one of the firm reduces the price, then this leads to an additional demand for that firm or that division of the merged firm, but it imposes a negative externality for the other firm, because if one part of the firm decreases prices, then that draws away customers from the other part of the firm, right? And if you have a merger, then exactly this effect, which is basically competition, and this effect is internalized to maximize joint profits, right? That means that this price reduction, if it happens, is less strong than it would be if there was no merger, right? Because you internalize the negative effect on the other part of your now larger firm. And to internalize this effect, what the merged entity basically does is that it increases something like tax, right? And this tax is basically, if you change the price, then how does this affect the other other part of your firm, right? And that's what this tax actually says. And that tax you have to impose on one of the firms, on the firms to internalize this cannibalization effect, basically, because one unit cannibalizes the other unit of the firm. And if we use the envelope theorem to back this out, then what we basically have here is the change in firm 2's prices in its own output, and multiply this by the change in Q2 over the change in Q1. And these two terms can be interpreted pretty well, because basically what the first term says is, how does the firm 2's prices change in its own output? So basically the slope, it's basically the term how if you change your output, how does it affect your profits? And the other term is the so-called diversion ratio, right? And it basically says that if there is a price increase P1, that is a price decrease of firm 1, such that the sales of firm 1 increase by 1 unit, how much does the output of firm 2 change, right? And this diversion ratio basically tells you how close these two products are as substitutes, right? So if it's high, then you have, if you have a change in 1 unit of one firm, then this will have a strong effect on the output of the other firm, right? If this effect is 0, for instance, well, then these two products are completely dissimilar and are not substitutable by the consumers. Okay, so if we have, again, if we apply that, then we multiply this diversion ratio, which is the second term here, by the change in output of firm 2 in Q2, which is basically the margin of firm 2, right? And therefore we are, with our internal tax, we arrived at this term here, right? And now we think about efficiency gains of the merger, right? And this efficiency gain basically manifests as this capital E here. And what it says is that the marginal costs are 1 minus this strength of the efficiency effect of the former marginal costs, so the pre-merger marginal costs. So if this would be 1, that means that we save 100% of our marginal costs, and the post-merger marginal costs are 0. So that means that we would have a very strong effect on our marginal costs, right? And this E is, it depends on the merger, of course. We can use this test as a slightly less strict situation if we start from our pre-merger marginal costs C pre in terms of our internal tax, right? And what we investigate in terms of our UPP test is that if this tax is stronger than the savings in costs, in marginal costs, then we have upward pricing pressure. So that means basically that what we internalize the effect that we internalize, if this effect is stronger than our cost-saving effect, again, these two effects that we just described in the beginning, then we have our pricing pressure. And if we just rearrange this inequality, we get to this point, right? So if the lessening of competition is stronger than the efficiency gain, we have our pricing pressure. And if we have a symmetric case where we say that the post-merger price, the pre-merger prices are the same and the diversion ratios are the same, then we can rearrange this this condition to what we have here. So the diversion ratio between the two products multiplied by the learner index times multiplied by the learner index over 1 minus the learner index. And if this is greater than 0, then we have our pricing pressure, right? So that's what we would have to analyze here. And if you want to have an overview of the test, then you can have a look at the Oldale and Padilla paper of GCLAP 2013. And it's basically, it summarizes the test, and it states that the test is not a full analysis of the post-merger situation. However, even if this partial approach tells you that the prices will tend to increase, then this tells us something, right? It is clear that the method can also be used for homogeneous products, right? In which case the diversion ratios would be pretty clear, actually. And this diversion ratio can also be interpreted as the share of firm 2's marginal consumers, i.e. those consumers that would basically switch the supplier if there's a small price change, and this share of these marginal consumers of firm 2 who view firm 1 as the second best substitutes, right? So basically those firms which are relatively indecisive whether to buy from firm 1 or firm 2, right? And as I said, the higher the diversion ratio, the stronger this substitutability between the two products is, and the stronger the price effect of the merger will be, because this strong substitutability will be internalized, which means that the upward pricing pressure is more likely to occur. Okay, what we can do, what there's also defined in the literature, is that this implicit tax, which we had on the left-hand side of our UPP test, is also called gross upward pricing pressure index. Why gross? Well, because we do not take into account any cost savings, and it's an index here, basically. And this GUPI, as it is called, is the value of sales that are being shifted to the merging rival, basically. And if you just take some example here, you have a diversion ratio of 20%, and you have a margin over marginal cost of 50 euros, then our gross upward pricing pressure index will be 10 euros, right? So this is basically, this 10 euros would be what you have to save, right? In order for the merger to be, not generate upward pricing pressure. Okay, so some practical considerations on these tests and about market definition. Well, if we look at recent decisions, then we see that UPP and GUPI are used, right? So they are used by the European Commission, so it's tests that are relevant, basically. If we have geographic market definition, if we look at geographic market definition, then there's another test, which is the Elzinga-Hogarty test. And what this basically investigates is the product flows between two areas, right? And if there's basically little product flows between the areas, then we would assume that these areas are not in the same relevant markets, right? And in order to investigate that, we have the little in from outside, which means that the share of products that are produced, share of goods produced abroad and consumed inside must not exceed a certain threshold. And little in from the outside means that the share of goods that is produced locally but not consumed locally, which is basically exported, must not exceed a certain percentage as well, right? So basically, if there's little imports and exports between the two regions, then we basically assume that they are not in the same relevant markets. What you can also do is to look at price correlations, natural experiments, and there's also the SIEC test. Price correlations, the basic idea is that, okay, you look at olive oil and sunflower oil, and you look at the correlation between the two, right? And you would basically see, it's just my guess at the moment, due to the Ukraine war, or at in the last few months, the prices for sunflower oil first started to gradually increase, whereas the prices for olive oil probably remained the same for some time, but then started to increase as well. And what the idea is that if one price increases, then the other follows, because it has the same supply and demand conditions. However, if you have products that use the same inputs but have nothing to do with each other, then we have a problem. Well, look at shampoo and toothpaste. I think in both products there should be water that is needed to produce it, but you will not wash your hair with toothpaste. So if the price for water increases, then the price for the two products might increase. However, these goods are not in the same relevant market. So these price correlations analysis should never stand alone. That would be misleading. Natural experiments are also interesting because, for instance, you look at two services which are supposed to be substitutes. And if one service is for instance, due to a technical outage or something, is not available for a certain amount of time, and you see that the other service, which is a supposed substitute, basically experiences no gain in consumer activity, then you probably can conclude that those are not close substitutes. Whereas if 100% of the consumer that have used the service before the outage now uses the other service, well, then you can conclude that they are pretty close substitutes. And the SIEC test is the so-called structural substantial impediment to effective competition test, which is basically also used by the Bundeskartellamt, which is like a holistic test where you look at whether effective competition is impeded. That's also, like, in practice, it's relevant. And I would like to conclude this lecture with some food for thoughts, basically. There's an article by Luis Caplo from 2015 in IGAO, and he says that the concept of market definition would suffer decisive logical infirmities, and which would render it infeasible and unnecessary and even counterproductive. And he also says that the appropriate role of market power and competition in policy poses a different sort of challenge. Surprisingly little research systematically illuminates the channels by which market power is relevant, right? And what he basically does is, well, why do we deal with this at all, right? Because what we do is basically arbitrary, unnecessary, and probably makes the problem more complex than we would like it to have, and it's not really thought out. So we would probably have to rethink the entire content, and we would also have to think about how market power is actually relevant in the given case, right? So that just to wrap it up and to give you an intuition of on the entire importance here. So from a practical perspective, there's always the question, if we have a merger, for instance, then we have to ask ourselves, how close are the merged entities' products to other products on the market, right? Because if they are close substitutes, then we probably have no problem. But if the merged entity gets a lot of market power and can shut the market or can exclude others from the market and increase prices relatively profitably, well, then it's not so good to allow for the merger, right? However, we have to keep in mind that all these different tests that we have are probably not so convincing that everybody agrees on how to use them, right? So we are still in this situation where we have a lot of different tools available, and we have to use every tool with some caution, right? And we also have to, each case is different, and we have to be very careful here. Okay, so that's all I have to tell you about. I wanted to tell you about market definition. Thank you very much for your attention. Please make sure to like and subscribe, to like the video and subscribe to our channel. And next time we were going to talk about mergers. Thank you and see you next time.